it's really interesting. So if I go back and look at what are the big wins that I've made in my career, either from a category point of view or even negotiation, the actual negotiation, the art of negotiation, the training courses we've all been on, they're good, they're fun, and it teaches you a bunch of skills to use. But if you think about, what were the real wins you gained, like the actual cash value of the real wins there?
We are increasingly finding commercial directors, marketing directors, ready, willing and able to bring the team, the marketing and the sales teams in their broadest sense together, both to do strategy work and also to do training, because I think there's a realisation and recognition. It doesn't really matter what you've got the production facility to create. If you're not going to create a new need state or create a new subcategory, then it is just going to be a volume switch.
If you are a startup or a brand that's not number one in the market, that's a great opportunity, right? Because there's loads to aim for. So there's loads of upside, and I'm a simple person in terms of how I look at that. You only need to do a few things to grow a category. So if you really boil it down, you want more customers buying more often, and the cherry on top is if they spend more per item, right? So
we're back today in central London to meet with Mike Luck, the founder and CEO of Curatyx. Hear from Mike about the opportunities to export to the wider world and the lessons he learned from a successful corporate career at Sainsbury's. Welcome to the podcast. Well, good morning, Mike.
Morning.
Really good to see you. Thank you for coming and joining us on a sunny but cold day in London. Absolutely freezing out there.
It is, yeah. No, good to see you too. Appreciate it.
It's been a while. We've spoken a few times recently on the phone, but not actually seen each other for a wee while.
Yeah.
So first of all, it'd be absolutely brilliant if you could just tell us about yourself, your background, what you did when we first met, maybe through to what you're doing today.
Yeah, no worries. So look, all of my background's in commercial roles, which is good for this podcast. But I started at 16 at Marks Spencer, so my career in retail started early. Saturday job, loved it. Ended up going through management training at Marks Spencer, so the retail side. And then I guess, how did I end up in buying? I had to write a training program as part of that for ladies' footwear. And train that out to stores, and I got to meet the buyers for footwear, clothing, and thought, this sounds cool, sounds interesting. And as you can see, probably less focused on fashion and more on food. So ended up at Sainsbury's as a graduate buyer, and then worked my way through loads of different roles. So lots of different buying roles: dairy, BWS, so beers, wines and spirits. Confectionery, so loads of fun there. And then we first met in pharmacy.
We did indeed,
which is one of those interesting career points, actually, because I didn't think I'd get that job. So I was head of pharmacy, so set up as a kind of separate business, bit off to the side of core Sainsbury's business. But probably the best move that ever happened to me. Got to meet people like yourself, which is great. But actually running that it is like a separate business, own P&L, probably got to show elements of skill sets that I hadn't had before. So it was a great opportunity. So I love that. So when I look back, and actually probably theme of this, commercial confidence, the type of roles that I really enjoyed were kind of the slightly weird and wacky ones that maybe weren't the core. So yeah, I guess that was a big learning for me. So yeah, pharmacy, ran the kind of core grocery area for Sainsbury's, then fresh produce, and then went into another kind of the slightly non-core roles of business development. So got to be the kind of sales side, set up a B2B function, and then ended up covering lots of different areas like global sourcing. So the team in Asia, future brands, petrol stations, which again is another one of those off at the sides.
Yeah, very different. I remember you telling me that how different the dynamics of that are. Yeah.
So loved all of those different roles, and then I left Sainsbury's. The last role was commercial director for Argos and the non-food side of the business, and then left in 2021. Wanted to do something different, and I guess test myself to a certain extent, and then set up a business called Curatyx with two former colleagues, so Paul and Avi, who you know. And we set up Curatyx, which is a sourcing solutions business. So predominantly focused, we actually sell, if you think back to the history that I've just mentioned, we predominantly sell Sainsbury's. So we have an exclusive agreement with Sainsbury's to sell their products globally, which is great. And also we support international retailers. Essentially, we help them differentiate their proposition, partly with Sainsbury's and partly with some brands. So we're starting to see, actually, and we can probably talk about that, but starting to see more brands come to us in terms of a way of helping them. So if it complements the Sainsbury's proposition and helps those brands grow and differentiates our partners, so international retailers, then I guess that's a good fit and what we're seeing growth in.
Absolutely. So it's interesting. You described there probably 7 or 8 different careers in one with one employer, which is absolutely brilliant. So we'll get into loads of that good stuff. It feels like broadly you and I made a similar decision about the same time, which is successful corporate career, but actually that hankering to maybe have a second career or do something different. Talk to us a bit about that process you went through to think it's something different, and how you sort of identified what that was.
Yeah, I guess you spend a lot of time, don't you, when you come out of a business. I was in Sainsbury's for 18 years. So you spend some time, what do I want to do? Getting older. What do I want to do? What do you want to do in kind of that second half of your career? And I guess part of it's testing yourself. So I don't know about you, but actually you're in a big organisation. You've got loads of support structures around you, lots of people, functions, which is great. And you learn loads. But actually, this is a real test, and you've probably found that. Starting with zero, there's nothing exists. You don't have an email. They're literally starting from zero, and that is a challenge. So the breadth of kind of areas that you need to get involved in: HR, insurance, so loads of different areas. So that is a real test, and I guess there's that challenge of if you don't make a sale or you're not selling stuff, you don't get paid. So ultimately it's not like you can talk about I always felt it was my money in a big organization, but ultimately this really is. It really is, and if you don't sell it, you don't get paid. So that kind of brings it home. So I guess that's part of the reason to do it is the challenge, and we see an opportunity. So we think there's a big size of prize in terms of market to get involved in that space internationally. So yeah, I guess that's part of the reason to want to do it, is to test myself and see what it's like. And also the other element, and I'm guessing you find this too, is the speed of decision making. So as much as when you're in a senior role, you can make decisions, but when it's a small business, the speed of decision making is rapid, right? Because it's either you making a decision on your own or with the three of us. It's relatively quick, and you can get on with it.
Yeah, the blessing is you get to make almost all of the decisions, at least within a small group. The curse is you get to make all of the decisions, and I've had that conversation with a couple of people, and sometimes it's liberating, sometimes it's terrifying, isn't it? But overall, it feels like when we talk, we're both enjoying the challenge and glad we made that choice about a second career, if you like. Yeah,
the sense of achievement's different as well, isn't it? So you can achieve big numbers in a big organisation, and so the numbers are drastically smaller. But when you see the sales come through or your orders for that month, that's a real buzz, right? So it's
absolutely.
It's great.
Absolutely. And you took some time out, you thought about what you wanted to do, you came into doing the role. We talked about previously the things that you love doing and the things that maybe you don't love doing so much, and we had a bit of a laugh about some of those things, but what are things you really enjoy doing in the day-to-day versus maybe some things that frustrate?
I love solving problems, and I think that's part of the reason why I like doing this, and maybe some of the reason for liking some of the roles previously that are slightly to the side or different. They had bigger problems to solve, so that made it really interesting. So for me, it's solving problems. I love that, finding, and even now. So again, I know we've spoken before, but all of my roles previously were kind of buying, sourcing. I've learned so much about logistics now, and warehouses and how they work, and stuff I'd never got involved in before. So I think that I enjoy, and solving those problems, dealing with customers. So finding new customers, that's great fun. All sorts of places that we get involved in terms of people, retailers we talk to, different levels of capability, so we can help them with their business as well. I love all of that. So I get to do lots. So speak to suppliers, speak to customers, solve problems. That's what I like doing. And I think I realised that if you take the big business and the governance and all the things that you have to do for the right reasons, it's probably less fun than doing getting involved in the stuff that's I would class as more fun anyway than some of that.
Yeah, absolutely. It's really interesting. We've run a few training programs in recent times with manufacturers and with retailers, and increasingly we're talking to a lot of our retail clients about the selling of that particular retailer strategy, that particular retailer as an opportunity to invest for suppliers. So actually the lines are blurring between buying and selling massively, and some organisations have got a really clear principle, which is buyers buy, and make sure they're selling to customers. But actually that principle of no, you've really got to sell in this volatile market to suppliers about why you as a retailer have the best strategy. You're going to attract the most shoppers. You're the horse to back. And my recollection of you and I working together was that was always in your DNA anyway, because you understood what we were trying to achieve as much as I was really keen to understand what you were trying to achieve. And it was a great trading relationship. It's probably part of the reason we're sat chatting today. We catch up every now and then. It's, I think you had both of those in abundance when you were at Sainsbury's, and I really respected you for it. So
Yeah, and I would say that it is a skill it needs to be from the buyer side and the seller side. And you probably remember, so I would spend a lot of time actually doing that selling into suppliers. So I'd spend time and ask, I want to present to your brand teams about what we're doing, because ultimately that brings them towards you and you get either more investment, but it needs people on the other side like yourself making that happen internally. So there's that. And I would say it's an interesting one in terms of the buying and the selling, actually, in terms of how people set themselves up. And if I go back in time, actually, probably the reason I did reasonably well as a buyer, most of the role was selling internally to make sure that I got as much as possible for you as the supplier, for me then as the category. So I used to spend a hell of a lot of time with the marketing team and go and see them face to face rather than just sending emails and all of that sort of stuff. That is the internal function. And actually, it's probably similar, I imagine, from the account manager side to the account directors, and it's making sure they're supporting the retailer with that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. We use that kind of the analogy of the knot in the bow tie. So it funnels through the buyer or it funnels through the account manager, but not just influencing people at different levels in the organisation, as you say, influencing operations, finance, supply chain, etc. It's a really huge task, but one I always really enjoyed, and I know you enjoyed it on your side as well. Something else we've talked about a lot is the fact that, given you and your partner's experience in the UK market is vast, those organisations that you are selling to elsewhere in the world, almost jumping over certain steps in terms of the evolution of the retail model and embracing things that are going on in the UK now in their market. So, it'd be great for you maybe to share that with people around some of the things that you're seeing. Yeah.
So in terms of our customer base, we have one customer that has one store. So we can go really small because of the way we work. We try to be frictionless, for example, in terms of so we can ultimately try to do as much as possible for the smallest possible customer up to, a multi-billion pound retailers. And the kind of core of our business is probably somewhere between 300 million turnover to 2 billion type retailer, just to put it in perspective. And then we go either side. So those type of retailers, I think that the UK is obviously advanced. We know that in terms of UK retail, and across the globe, there's different variability in terms of how retail's executed. I think one of the real interesting points I can see is there's many other markets are more fragmented. So, when you look at market reports, they talk about modern retail as we would see the big players here in terms of structure, and that's growing. But sometimes you see it's almost jumping a stage of development. So we've gone through the kind of the move to modern retail, then a bit into online, then you start to see some quick commerce happening, and some of the markets have just jumped straight to quick commerce. So you take the Middle East, I know we both do elements of business there, but one of our team lives there, and she can order her groceries with WhatsApp. So WhatsApp delivery, 15 minutes, and it turns up, and that's a step on from us. Now they might be not at the same level, maybe in sourcing or in different areas, but you can see how some of this is changing. And I think private label is actually an interesting one. So the UK is really, really advanced in private label, which is why some of our business exists as it does, because we can, offer ranges that are vast compared to most retailers globally. So that, I guess, that sourcing aspect is starting to catch up, and people are becoming more developed around that as well. And I think that's an opportunity for the UK and Europe, actually, because those markets are more advanced, and even the likes of China, the US. So you definitely see opportunity there.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I was working at Acosta prior to joining Sellex, and one of the reasons Acosta originally bought the UK entity that was known as Reach is the strategy director at the time, a guy called Steve Kremser, could see the canary in the coal mine that certain dynamics in the UK represented, one in particular being private label. So I'd spend lots of time talking to him about the evolution of Taste the Difference and Finest, on the back of the global financial crisis, more people eating at home but wanting to treat themselves, and that evolution. And I said that the percentage of private label that remains prevalent in the UK, the US is catching up incredibly rapidly now. So actually that experience on a consultative basis is really powerful as well, I think.
Yeah, and it's the ability to jump some of those stages. So you talk about loyalty as a good example, and Nectar, Clubcard in the UK, great businesses, great loyalty schemes in their own rights, both of them. But it's taken 20 odd years to get them to where they are now. But actually, some of the international retailers that are starting to get involved can almost jump a lot of that. The personalization, the ability to use that data. There's a lot of opportunity to miss the learning, if that makes you can jump straight almost to the solution. So I think that's quite interesting for those markets and different retailers as to where they invest. Sorry,
I cut across you, but you can almost see kind of what happened with Ocado and Ocado's fulfillment model, going out to other retailers, you can almost see those models being adopted in other markets now. And you say going from 0 to 100 very, very quickly in terms of loyalty.
Yeah, and the same sourcing, there's so many aspects that can be done as those markets consolidate, and you expect to see that modern retail grows and the online and quick commerce. So it's interesting to see that, and I guess that's the view that we get in our business, is to do that across multiple different territories, which is great to see.
You've talked to me previously about brands coming to you and recognising the international opportunity, recognising obviously Curatyx capability and experience in that space. So what's setting brands apart that are coming to you, that are really clear what they're trying to achieve with a clear proposition? What would your advice be if someone wanted to talk to you about that?
I guess the reason that they're coming to us is that it goes back to that frictionless point. So one, for the retailer, and always you're not exactly perfect all of the time, but that's what we're aiming to be, and it's similar for the brands as well. So if you take exporting's not necessarily easy, depends on the territory you go to. Sometimes very difficult, sometimes it's not too bad, but there are risks involved with doing that, whether it's paperwork, payment, all of those elements. So for us, the reason I think people like working with us is that, one, they trust us because we've obviously got a reasonably good, I would hope, reputation in the UK.
Absolutely, yeah.
So if you're a UK brand, they kind of know who we are and I guess what we stand for from a values perspective, which I think is important. And the fact that we're ultimately a UK sale. So we do all the paperwork, we take all the payment risks. So we're taking on all of those aspects for you. So as a brand, that's relatively, that's good to hear. So if you're in, the brands that we've started to see come to us are more about, they aren't exporting. It's how can we learn? How can Curatyx help us? How can we, help each other, I guess, in that sense? And if it complements what we do with Sainsbury's, then that's great all round. And if you think about solutions for our retailers, the reason they work with us is because they want either differentiation, they might want advice in terms of consulting, but we tend to work exclusively as well. That's a point with a retailer. So it really develops a strong relationship. So we want to be in all the territories, but we tend to want to have one partner in a territory. And that means we work together in a kind of close relationship. And again, bringing some of these brands into that market or those markets means that it's differentiating the retailer as well. So everyone kind of wins along that value chain is what we're trying to do. And I think that's why people come to us, I guess, going back to the question.
Yeah, no, great. And one of the questions I was itching to ask you is, Brexit is talked about an awful lot. And I don't want to get into the sort of history of it, and I know you probably don't either, but for people that don't know, they may be keen to export to markets but don't really understand that complexity. What would some of the real challenges be day to day, week to week?
Well, firstly, I used to have a lot of hair before Brexit, so I would say that it is a real challenge. It's not, I guess one principle for me is everything's possible. So it's always possible to do. But, if you think of some of the legislation around putting not for EU on some of the packaging, the processes that you have to put in place, it makes it extremely difficult to export to certain markets. So I think that is it's never impossible, but it has made it interesting in terms of what do you do as a business owner? Where do you focus your time and investment and people and money ultimately? We haven't really focused there because there are much better markets for us to work on first before we go back to Europe. So it's interesting.
Going further, geographically further.
Yeah. If you go back 10 or more years, it would have been the first place that we probably went to. So the flip is interesting in terms of as a business owner, what do you do? Where do I spend my time and money? We haven't focused there for all of those reasons. So I would love for that to change, and for us to find some way as a country to solve some of that in terms of the friction and make that easier. But it is what it is, and you have to work around it. So there's still opportunities there, and I think good opportunities for brands, and brands are making that work. So yeah, there are opportunities, and I guess the other bit we always look at is sometimes when it's difficult, that opens up opportunity as well. So when some of these, if it's tariffs from the US, those changes, I offer an opportunity as well. So
because you're on top of the detail and understand how to overcome that challenge.
Yeah, and it changes supply chain. So when there's a kind of a change in that, either a retailer or a supplier have to find solutions, and we might be the part of that solution. You might be part of that solution. So there are ways of us. Those things do open up opportunities, but Brexit has been a particularly tough one, I would say.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things I was really keen to chat to you about is your 18 years at Sainsbury's. You've met some phenomenal suppliers. You've met some really challenging suppliers.
Yeah.
Just like to get to a conversation around what set those suppliers that got disproportionate growth or disproportionate opportunity with you and with Sainsbury's. What were those key facets of those people, those organisations?
I guess there's a there's a balance between, I guess, two versions. I would say there's probably some of the startups and then some of the big businesses. And I guess those that probably got disproportionate time. It's not always the biggest actually. So it's an interesting one. So some were big suppliers, but maybe not the number one in that particular category. I always found that some of those that were aiming to disrupt or to change a category probably had a better outlook and maybe got some more time from me, not because they weren't the biggest, but they probably had a better approach to the category. And I would say that's probably the number one element for me in spending time, which is why we used to like working together, because it's kind of category focused. And actually, I would say if you have, from a supplier side into the retail, and probably both ways, going back to our conversation earlier, it's if you have a strong category strategy between you, it kind of has something to anchor the relationship to as well, because there are going to be kind of bumps in the road, right? You're going to have bumps in the road. You're going to have a disagreement. It might be cost, might be whatever it is. But if you know you're both aiming in the same direction, and actually it's a really strong category kind of strategy plan around that, then it kind of draws you back to, at least you know you're both working on the same kind of same area. And so I'd say that's the number one part, is that kind of focus on category rather than just, if you sit on the buyer side, you see loads of presentations, you go through loads of PowerPoints and you kind of skip to the end, and it's just, you know what it's like, right? So if you are an account manager, remember that's what
I stopped taking the commercial slide out of the back of some presentations.
But right? And you see so many, so part of it's about being different, but I do. And always for me, because I was interested in the category and I wanted to grow the category, I was never interested in switching volume around between brands, because was good for a brand. Sometimes it was pointless for the buyer. So it's about the category. So I think that's a strong point. And then also giving something back to me that's different. So again, if you think back to kind of category strategies and that selling internally, those account managers, account directors, teams that were selling internally are doing a better job there. That ultimately got more time with me, because then I was, my category was doing a better job versus my competitors, because I always had to grow market share. You know what the targets are like. You have to grow market share. And the only way to do that really is to do something different to the competition, because if you all run the same promotion on the same brand at the same time, and guess what? You will achieve the same result, don't you? So it has to be different. So I guess there's a key point there as well. So selling internally is a big one for me in terms of the best.
Yeah, absolutely. And we talked about challenger brands, and we talked about the number one, number two. What would your advice be to a third, fourth, fifth place player in the category that's got the right category mindset, knows that's the way to unlock future growth? What would your advice be to those players sat there, maybe slightly frustrated in the middle?
It's an interesting one, actually, going back to probably a bit of the last conversation. It's the strategies or the suppliers that got me most excited were those creating new categories almost. And they don't have to be kind of massive evolutions, but if you take juice, one of my early jobs was juice, and then you look at the kind of the growth of smoothies within that was very incremental in terms of a category. So if you're working with the guys at the time, it was innocent, the early days, because I'm a bit old, so that was early on in the time. But those guys did a great job in terms of growing that part of the category. And actually, if I looked at the utilization of space that I have, the incrementality of smoothies at the time, maybe not so true now, but at the time, that was great. So you're growing a category. You take active health drinks, which is another area, and if you're going back to Muller and Yakult, maybe a bit bigger than Danone at the time. But they had a really great category strategy. So that then got time. They supported me. We grew the space ahead of the market. So it's the use of space, incrementality. I think that's interesting from those, either a startup brand or a brand that's trying to challenge how that kind of category operates. I think that's because that's where the big win is. That's where the pie grows significantly bigger, and that's that they were big wins.
Yeah, we are increasingly finding commercial directors, marketing directors, ready, willing, and able to bring the team, the marketing and the sales teams in their broadest sense together, both to do strategy work and also to do training, because I think there's a realization and recognition. It doesn't really matter what you've got the production facility to create. If you're not going to create a new need state or create a new subcategory, then it is just going to be a volume switch. So we're seeing, I think it was driven partly by the volume declines that some brands have experienced over the last year, 18 months, but also by the realization that actually that moment in time that retail media presents, all of a sudden those decisions are being made closer to the point of purchase. The influence points are closer to the point of purchase. There's no use having a sales budget and a marketing budget. It's got to be one way of thinking. And actually, given you've got to grow the category, you've got to influence the retailer to say you've got a point of difference here to grow the category. I really feel a sea change coming. Whereas actually, I think you were quite rare in wanting to engage with the brand owners in the way that you did when we worked together many years ago. That's getting a lot better now, I think. So that does help with how categories are going to grow and hopefully how innovation is going to come back into certain categories.
Yeah, and if you are a startup or a brand that's not number one in the market, that's a great opportunity, right? Because there's loads to aim for. Yeah. So there's loads of upside. And you know, I'm a simple person in terms of how I look at that. You know, you only need to do a few things to grow a category. So if you really boil it down, you want more customers buying more often. And the cherry on top is if they spend more per item, right? So you look at that and you think, that's relatively straightforward, isn't it? It's not as easy as that, but that's what you need to do. And if you're a challenger brand, or you can come in and you've got a slightly different proposition, you can trade people up. There's loads to go at. And actually, so you've probably got a more engaging story for a buyer or a category team than maybe some of the larger guys. And you shouldn't forget that, because actually, if the buyer wants to grow the category, there are lots of opportunities for you to kind of get way above your fair share in time, effort, because that's where the win is.
Yeah, and I think there's another dynamic at play where clearly Tesco and Sainsbury's have had a phenomenal few years. Hopefully, for their sake, that continues. But at some point, the tide will turn. Asda and Morrison's
not linked to me leaving as well.
No, absolutely, absolutely no linkage whatsoever. But Asda and Morrison's, you know, they're coming back. How quickly are they going to come back? So I think that power of the relationship that you talked about a few moments ago is really important, because there's going to be some calculated risks, some leaps of faith. Where do you place your bets, and how do you build relationships on trust and on category growth? To know which retailer you as a sales director are going to support, or if you're a national account manager, going to your commercial director and saying, I really think we need to change our perspective on investing in this customer because the tide is turning. Yes, there's lots and lots of data. Look in the rearview mirror to tell you what's been happening, but there's a real relationship leap of faith required going forward, because I think it's going to be a really interesting 18 months now as the performance dynamics change.
Yeah. So from a supplier point of view, there's big decisions to be made. Yeah. And actually, as you go through that planning process, joint business plans, from the retailer side, depending on who you are, actually all of them probably want to be doing a really good selling job, going back to what we were talking about earlier, selling their business in, because there is going to be probably more of it's a tougher decision maybe going forward for the next couple of years than it has been. It's probably been relatively easy to decide where do you invest based on what's been happening in the market, right? And if that's a bigger choice to make, you want to make sure you are absolutely at the front of the queue in terms of where that money's being invested. And that goes back to the buyer and the category team doing a good job, and from the account management team as well. You know, that relationship needs to be really strong and focused. So I guess if I was on the either side of those, I'd be focusing very, very much on my part of that and how I can make that happen.
And I've been in the reception area of probably three of the four traditional big grocers in recent weeks, and there is a buzz in the offices. People are physically meeting up. People are physically talking. There's lots of change going on. So whilst I think the changing strategy of some is causing some confusion, and maybe there are certain people that are relatively new in their career that haven't maybe experienced those different dynamics in the market, you know, there's a buzz and people are engaged and people are talking again, which I think is great, because for 4 years of supply chain challenges and inflationary discussions, it's great that people are re-engaging in the way that I'm kind of seeing. But actually, I also think the money has now got to be taken away from negotiation training and put into how do you add value, how do you add category value, how do you drive a strategic relationship built on trust. So we're pushing very hard for, do you really need to put everyone through another set of negotiation training, or do you really need to do your next negotiation strategy? Let's talk about other ways that you can get people thinking category growth mindset, profitable revenue growth management mindset. So it's going to be exciting and interesting year, I think.
And it's really interesting. So if I go back and look at what are the big wins that I've made in my career, either from a category point of view or even negotiation, the actual negotiation, the art of negotiation, the training courses we've all been on, they're good, they're fun, and it teaches you a bunch of skills to use. But if you think about, what were the real wins you gained? Like the actual cash value of the real wins there, it's nowhere near as big as the category wins. So growing a category ahead of the market, the cash win in there is huge in comparison to the small chipping away at the odd % here and there. And you need to do it. So I'm not saying don't do it, but they're small versus, and then the other side is understanding value chain. So reshaping how you buy is a much bigger win. The logistics side of it, where the product comes from, that's where the wins are. And that's not really a negotiation. That's kind of fact-based logic, understanding how the product moves from A to B, ultimately removing brown boxes most of the time around the world or the country. That's where the win is. So I think, absolutely right. Focus on those areas that's where the size of prize is, not banging the table.
Chipping away.
Yeah.
And it is, as you say, you negotiate once every 2, 3, 4 months, probably.
Yeah.
In a big way. Whereas actually, you and I would meet regularly on a Friday at London Colney. We'd have a good conversation about what was going on and how we could help each other. I think about how much time we spent doing that stuff versus actually getting down to brass tacks. But as you say, we'd have spent much more time on the negotiation had we not worked out what each other needed out of the trading relationship. So I think the pendulum is going back in that direction. We just need to, as an industry, make sure it keeps going in that direction so as that actually you sell hard to one another and you negotiate really easily and, don't open ridiculously extreme because that's just boring, isn't it? Let's work out where we really need to be and work out how we grow the pie.
Yeah, I agree. And going back to kind of the international difference versus the UK, I would say that's probably not in all territories, and it's different everywhere, but there's probably more of the what I would class as standard negotiation rather than the understanding how do we make things more efficient. And that's changing actually. So I would say there's more focus on, it goes back to cost of living, because the other thing I've noticed actually, just as an aside, we obviously felt cost of living at a certain time, but that hits at different points around the world, because if you take most of it was or a lot driven by energy, for example. But depending on where you are in the world, you don't have an energy problem. You might have a different issue. So what's causing cost of living might be different in the Middle East to what it is in Australia versus the UK, because you all have different reasons as to why that's being caused, and then you have to reshape supply chains based on what you're seeing. So I would say that's another dynamic actually internationally that you see slightly differently. Some of the timing's different.
Yeah, and I suppose the beauty of what you're doing is typically it would be the global board for a Nestle or a global board for a PepsiCo seeing that stuff, whereas actually given what you're doing, you're sort of seeing some of the same dynamics. Running the Curatyx business. It's really interesting actually.
Yeah, it is. It's fascinating to see. Yeah.
So Mike, I just wanted to maybe change direction a little bit, and as someone who had a phenomenal career at Sainsbury's, progressed brilliantly through the organisation based on great skills I know. Who are the people, or what were the types of people you would look to for mentoring support, coaching support? Where did you get that source of inspiration from to keep going even when it got tough?
Number of different areas, really. I guess obviously your teammates. So within Sainsbury's is full of great people. One of business partner, so Paul, my boss for a long time. So great in terms of feedback, as you know. I'm sure you've had some. But yeah, so lots of people within the business, meeting up with people like you. So keeping in touch with good people, so you can bounce ideas off, just understand what's going on in the industry, etc., etc. Reading. There's so much out there. The internet's massive now, isn't it? You think back to our career, there wasn't a lot going on in
IGD.
Space. But now there's so much you can learn. So there's studies out there. I can read all sorts of random stuff. Go back to when discounters were growing. Find a study on what happened in Europe when discounters grew in certain markets. So you can there's so much out there to learn. So I'd be kind of curious, I guess, in that sense, and reading. Also read one of the books you suggested the other week. How Brands Grow. So good suggestion. So those kind of elements of pulling in. But I would say dealing or starting up a business, doing it not on my own, and with Avi and Paul has been a huge benefit. So Avi being a second time kind of business owner, if that makes sense, having done it once, learning, giving us feedback is massive, and sharing kind of some of those responsibilities, burdens as well. So I'd say both of those guys are almost mentors in the same way, even though we work together. That's big for me.
Yeah, I think one of the things I realised is people said to me, "And you'll make loads and loads of mistakes." And I thought, well, I'm reasonably shrewd and I'm quite tight, therefore I won't. You absolutely do. You absolutely do. But I think the power of having conversations with yourself, with Paul, with another Mike Green, it's really helped me. Yep. If it gets a bit stressful and a bit dark, there's lots of people to reach out to, and I've been blown away by people's generosity with their time. So if there's anyone listening or watching that is thinking about doing it, it's not for the faint-hearted, but actually you'd be amazed the generosity of people to provide support and provide guidance. So yeah, I would echo some of those sentiments. Absolutely.
Yeah, and definitely speak to people that have done it.
Yes,
rather than
thought about it.
Believe that they might be able to do it, because it is very different.
I totally agree with that. I totally endorse that. Again, changing tack. One of the things I was really keen to talk to you about, so that you could share it with the people listening in and the people watching, is if you were to go back 10 or 15 years and sit down with a younger Mike, still mid kind of corporate career, what do you know now that you'd love to have known then about how to approach your corporate role?
I mean, I would say there's probably not a lot that I would change in terms of the outcome, because I had a great time, learned loads. If I was going back and to say, actually, what would I do differently? I would spend much more time on networking, maybe than I did. It's probably a bit lazy, actually, if I'm honest, in terms of that. In a big company, a lot of people probably should have spent more time externally, even though, you keep in touch with people like yourself. I'd probably do more of that, because I would say that comes back to help you. And it might be in 10 years' time when you might not realize that, but I probably missed the trick, I would say, in some of that. So I'd definitely focus there. That'd probably be one of the bigger elements for me, internally and outside. And then just, I guess, part of it's like belief. So as much as I'm quite a confident chap, but kind of go for it, because actually, what is there to lose? So yeah, some of those kind of, you take risks, chances, whatever else is probably push even harder to say, well, just go for it.
Yeah, one of the things, phrases I've used a few times on training courses is, the moment I realised that no one had kidnapped my children in a negotiation, in going in and asking for something quite audacious internally in terms of extra investment, what's the worst that can happen? And I think, as I've had a family, you develop that kind of perspective. And I don't know if then going on my sort of entrepreneurial journey was another evolution of that, but I've definitely seen good people, yourself included, get kind of bolder and braver as they've got older. Whether it's the experience, it's the confidence, or a combination of the two. But I'm loving seeing people doing some really exciting things. And sometimes they kind of had a tough week, and sometimes had a brilliant week. But you get a sense overall that most people that have gone out and done it have really enjoyed it. Yeah. But I think your advice about talk to the people that have really got the scars is a really important one.
Yeah, and you definitely need to think about it before making that leap. Yeah. But going back to what is the worst that can happen? Well, I need to go and get a job again.
Absolutely.
It's one of those, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. So thinking about, without giving away too many strategic secrets around Curatyx, as you start to think 3 and 5 years into the future, what are the big things that you are excited about? Maybe what are some of the things that you are protecting yourself from, or thinking about more in this sort of slightly challenging geopolitical landscape?
Yeah, I guess we talked about it earlier, that change and challenging landscape can create opportunities. So I'd say there's definitely there. If I go back to kind of the basis of us as a business, we've got a really good foundation. So we've got a very, very good team. So we're really lucky. So the capability is high for a small number of people. So we've got a great team, got great processes now. So, you're in your third year, you kind of set up, what you're doing. So really it's about growth. So I'd say that the priorities for us is, it's ideally we want to be in every territory in the world. Why would you not, as long as it's legal, allowed, and from that side, we'd want to be everywhere. So it's picking up new territories. I think it's really important for us, and we're making great progress on that. So that's one part. In terms of what's happening in the world, I would say that throws up a number of opportunities. So you sit and you look at certain markets, and if you're a retailer in Mexico or Canada at the moment, you're probably sitting there looking at it to say, actually, we do need to reshape some of our supply chains and value chains, because it's quite heavily US dependent for certain categories. And you look at that and say, well, is that really what you want going forward? There's a lot of risk involved in that now. Actually, there might be opportunities to become better at global sourcing, for example, setting up new supply chains. That's a good opportunity for the UK, Europe in particular, I would say. So I do think there are opportunities like that then potentially from our side, whether that's consulting or elsewhere, you can kind of, you can find gaps and opportunities within that. So that disruption in some ways is good, because if it's easy, everyone could do it. If it's not easy, then you need help.
But if you're nimble with great processes, nimble and a great team, as I know I know you have, you're absolutely right. And you talked there about really getting your processes nailed, and it's something that we've looked at a lot very recently, because as you mature and as you grow, you have to, and I'll put a book recommendation on my LinkedIn profile later, a book called Traction, which I would highly recommend, and I'll share that one out. But again, every now and then you read something that you know some of it, you learn some new things, but also massively pricks your conscience in terms of how you're operating. So we're probably back into that procedural review as we speak. So it's quite important, isn't it? As you grow, you change, and you have to make sure that procedures are right. Absolutely. So as a parting thought, parting comment, your own personal development plan. Now, clearly every day's a learning day when you're running your own business, but what are the things you're trying to improve on and trying to learn about and do better for maybe the next 12 months?
I guess one of them, and you probably see this as well, is focus. So there are so many opportunities. So, particularly for us, you've got the whole world to aim at, right? So it's huge. And you can get distracted really easily. So I would say for us and for me personally, it's focus, because if we just focus on that kind of core, it will all come true and it will be good. But it's really easy to get distracted. So I'd say one, in terms of I need to not get distracted, so focus. The other areas are kind of actually some of the reading and kind of prompting myself to learn and challenge myself in terms of my understanding. Particularly, obviously we understand the export market, but different categories and different territories as well, and some of the cultural aspects of that as well. So for me, it's continuing to kind of talk to as many people as possible and learn as much as possible. Whether that's kind of internet-based courses, and there's lots out there actually you can join that are free. And then you might only take one nugget away every now and again, but all of those, a bit like this conversation, if that helps, there's a few nuggets for people, then there's a lot that you can pick up. So yeah.
Brilliant. Mike, thank you so much for your time. I really, really appreciate it. It's always great to reconnect. It just leaves me to say thank you ever so much, and we'll catch up again really soon.
Brilliant. Good to see you.
You too. Thanks, Mike.
Cheers.